Can a heart forged in shadow and bloodshed survive the blinding light of true love? You tell me. But first, let me tell you about Rocco Bastone, a man they called the Shadow King, and the girl who became the one thing he couldn't control, and the only thing he couldn't bear to lose. Liliana Marino was not a princess in a tower. She was collateral. Her father, a man with champagne tastes and a gambler's empty pockets, had signed her over as a marker against a debt so vast it could have purchased a small country. And so Leah found herself a gilded captive in Rocco's sprawling clifftop villa. A place where marble floors were colder than a morgue slab, and the scent of night-blooming jasmine couldn't quite mask the faint metallic tang of old violence. She was supposed to be a symbol of his power, a beautiful breakable thing to adorn his fortress. But from the moment she stood before him, chin high and eyes blazing with a fire that defied her terror, Rocco knew he'd made a grave miscalculation. She wasn't a trinket, she was a wildfire. He had given her everything and nothing. A wardrobe filled with silk gowns she refused to wear, choosing simple cotton dresses that only accentuated the defiant curve of her spine. A library filled with first editions she devoured with a hunger that unnerved him. And a sleek black smartphone. For emergencies, he'd said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. My number is the only one in it. Do not use it unless the world is ending. Leah had simply stared at the phone in her palm. A cold, useless brick connecting her to the very man who held her cage. The world had already ended, she thought. Her world. Their days bled into a tense ballet of avoidance and confrontation. He would find her in the rose garden, her delicate fingers tracing the thorns on a blood-red bloom, and the juxtaposition would steal the air from his lungs. The thorns are there for a reason, Piccolina, he'd murmur, his presence a heavy cloak settling over her. She wouldn't flinch. To protect the beauty from men who only know how to crush it, his jaw would tighten, a muscle twitching in that handsome, brutal face. He was a king in a kingdom of fear, his every command met with immediate, unquestioning obedience. Yet this slip of a girl, with eyes the color of a stormy sea, challenged him with every breath. She was the only person who saw the man and not the monster, and it terrified him more than any rival's bullet. Watching them from the periphery was Vincenzo Gallo, Rocco's cousin and underboss. His smile was a razor blade wrapped in velvet, his loyalty as thin as spun glass. He saw Leah not as a woman, but as a flaw in Rocco's armor, a crack in the foundation of his empire. Vincenzo craved the throne, and he believed love was a disease that rotted kings from the inside out. He cornered her once by the grand staircase, his cologne cloying and invasive. You are a dangerous distraction, little bird, he'd whispered, his gaze sliding over her with a possessive chill. Cages can break, but so can wings. Leah had held his gaze, her heart hammering against her ribs. It is the caged bird that learns the true meaning of flight, Vincenzo. You should remember that. His smile widened, but it never reached his cold, dead eyes. He saw the simmer of affection in Rocco's guarded glances, the way his voice softened almost imperceptibly when he spoke her name. It was a weakness, and Vincenzo Gallo was a connoisseur of weakness. The plan was subtle, elegant in its cruelty. A rare, paralyzing agent derived from a tropical flower, tasteless and odorless, slipped into her evening tea by a maid who owed Vincenzo her family's safety. He didn't want her dead. Not yet. He wanted her helpless. He wanted to see the great Rocco Bastone, the Shadow King, unravel at the sight of his broken toy. The effects were slow at first. A heaviness in her limbs as she sat reading in the conservatory, the book slipping from her grasp. She tried to stand, a wave of confusion washing over her as her legs refused to cooperate. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog in her mind. Her arms felt like lead, her fingers tingling and unresponsive. She was a prisoner in her own body. With a final, desperate surge of will, she focused on the phone lying on the table beside her. It was an inch away, then a mile. Gritting her teeth, her body trembling with the strain, she dragged her hand across the polished wood, her fingernails scraping as she hooked the device and pulled it toward her. Her vision was blurring, the edges darkening. Her thumbs were clumsy, numb things, but muscle memory and sheer terror guided them. The screen lit up with Rocco's name. Just his name. A single contact. A lifeline. Her fingers trembled as she typed the 5 words that felt like her last will and testament. I can't move my arms. She hit send and the world went gray. Rocco was in the middle of negotiating a truce with the Irish syndicate, the air in his study thick with cigar smoke and unspoken threats. The men across from him were hard, their faces maps of old street fights, but none were as formidable as the man at the head of the table. He was mid-sentence, his voice a low, commanding growl, when his phone vibrated against the mahogany. He ignored it. Business was business. It vibrated again, a persistent, urgent pulse. Leo, his consigliere, shot him a questioning look. Rocco's rules were absolute. No interruptions. Ever. With a sigh of irritation, he glanced at the screen. Leah. His heart seized. His eyes scanned the words and in an instant, the calculated calm of the Mafia Don was incinerated, replaced by the primal fury of a predator whose mate was threatened. The Irishman watched, bewildered, as the color drained from Rocco's face, only to be replaced by a chilling, murderous darkness. He stood so abruptly his chair screeched back, nearly tipping over. Without a word to his guests, he typed a reply, his thumb jabbing at the screen with savage precision. Don't shift, I'm coming. He shoved the phone in his pocket and faced the room. Leo, he snarled, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper that promised death. Get them out. Now, he didn't wait for an answer. He stormed from the room, his long strides eating up the marble hallway. His men, loyal soldiers conditioned to his moods, saw the look on his face and scrambled, grabbing weapons, their minds racing. Was it an attack? A betrayal? But Rocco wasn't thinking about his empire. He wasn't thinking about money or power or respect. He was thinking of stormy eyes and a defiant chin. He was thinking of the scent of jasmine and roses. He was thinking of Leah. His mind was a frantic storm, picturing 1,000 horrors. Had she fallen? Was someone in the house? Had Vincenzo made good on his veiled threats? He burst into the conservatory, his chest heaving. The sight that greeted him stopped his heart. She was slumped in her armchair, her head lolled to the side, the fallen book at her feet. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow. For a terrifying second he thought she was dead. Leah. Her name was a raw, broken thing torn from his soul. Her eyelids fluttered. She was conscious. Relief so potent it made him dizzy. Warred with a rage so profound he could barely see. He knelt before her, his large, scarred hands hovering over her, afraid to touch, afraid to break her further. Piccolina, what happened? Her voice was a faint whisper laced with tears. I don't know. My body, it won't? He saw the terror in her eyes, the sheer horror of being trapped inside herself, and something inside him, a wall he'd spent a lifetime building, crumbled to dust. Gently, as if she were the most precious artifact in the world, he scooped her into his arms. She was terrifyingly light. He cradled her against his chest, her head falling into the crook of his neck. Sua amore mio, he murmured, the endearment slipping out as natural as breathing. I have you. Nessuno ti tocca. No one touches you. I promise. He carried her through the villa, his men parting before him like the Red Sea. He ignored their shocked faces, their questions. He took her not to a guest room, but to his own private chambers, a sanctuary no one else was ever permitted to enter. He laid her on his bed, the black silk sheets a stark contrast to her pale skin. He called for his private doctor, a man who knew how to keep his mouth shut, his tone leaving no room for delay. As they waited, he sat beside her, holding her limp hand, his thumb stroking her cold skin. He watched the slow rise and fall of her chest. Every breath she took a victory against the fury coiling in his gut. Someone had done this. Someone in his house. In his fortress. Someone had dared to touch what was his. And when he found them, he would burn their world to the ground. The doctor confirmed his fears. A fast-acting neurotoxin, non-lethal in that dosage, designed to induce temporary paralysis. It would wear off in a few hours, leaving no trace. An accident, the doctor suggested, perhaps from a contaminated household item. Rocco knew better. This was a message sent with surgical precision. It was an act of war disguised as a mishap. While Leah slept, the toxin slowly receding from her system, Rocco and Leo reviewed the security footage. There was nothing. A maid serving tea. A gardener trimming the hedges outside the conservatory window. Nothing out of the ordinary. It was Vincenzo. Rocco stated, his voice flat and cold. It wasn't a question. There is no proof, Rocco, Leo cautioned, his face grim. He was with me all afternoon reviewing the shipping manifests. Proof is a luxury, Leo. I have instinct. He looked back toward the bedroom where Leah lay. He wanted to show me that he could get to her. That she makes me vulnerable. And does she? Leo asked quietly. Rocco's gaze was unflinching. She makes me lethal. When Leah finally awoke, the first thing she felt was the tingling sensation of pins and needles returning to her fingers and toes. The second was the weight of a hand holding hers. She opened her eyes to find Rocco asleep in the chair beside her bed. His head slumped forward, his usually immaculate suit rumpled. In sleep, the hard lines of his face softened. The mask of the Shadow King stripped away to reveal a man exhausted and burdened. She shifted, and his eyes snapped open, instantly alert. The ruthless Dawn was back. How do you feel? He asked, his voice rough with sleep. Like I can feel again, she whispered, flexing her fingers. He watched the small movement as if it were a miracle. A long silence stretched between them, filled with the unspoken terror of the last few hours. Who did it, Rocco? She asked, her voice gaining strength. He didn't insult her intelligence by pretending it was an accident. I will handle it. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting, he said, his tone final. But something had irrevocably shifted between them. The attack, meant to drive them apart, had fused them together. In the following days, she saw a side of him he showed to no one else. He brought her meals himself, dismissing the staff. He sat with her in the library, not speaking, simply sharing the same space, a silent guardian whose presence was a comfort she was loath to admit. One night, a storm raged outside, rattling the villa's massive windows. They sat before the fireplace in his study, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. Why do they call you the Shadow King? She asked, her voice soft. He stared into the fire, his profile carved from stone. My father was betrayed by his closest friend. His brother. They killed him in our own home. I was 10. I hid in the shadows of the hallway and watched. I learned then that shadows are the only safe place. They are where you see everything and no one sees you. He turned to look at her, his dark eyes holding a universe of pain. I live in the shadows, Leah. It's all I've ever known. She reached out, her fingers hesitantly touching the back of his hand. His skin was warm, a stark contrast to his reputation. Maybe you don't have to, she whispered. That was the moment. The air crackled, charged with a current that had been building since the day she arrived. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to her lips, and the entire world seemed to shrink to the space between them. You are a dangerous light, Piccolina, he breathed against her mouth. You will get burned. Then let me burn, she replied and closed the distance. The kiss was not gentle. It was a desperate, hungry collision of two worlds, of darkness and light, of captivity and a dangerous, terrifying freedom. It was a confession, an absolution, a promise of beautiful ruin. It was the beginning of the end. Vincenzo watched this new intimacy with a venomous satisfaction. The poison hadn't worked as he'd intended, but the result was even better. Rocco wasn't just protective. He was besotted, blind. It was time for the final act. He arranged a meeting with the head of the rival Moretti family, a man whose hatred for Rocco was legendary. Vincenzo offered him a gift: the layout of the Bastone Villa, security patrol schedules, and the date of the annual St. Sebastian's Gala, a night when Rocco's guard would be focused on his guests. The price? A clean shot at Rocco. Vincenzo would handle the chaos from the inside, seizing control and blaming the Morettis for the entire bloody affair. And as a bonus, he told them about Leah. Kill the girl first, Vincenzo had hissed. Make him watch. A king is only a man when you take his queen. The night of the gala was a masterpiece of opulence and tension. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto men in tailored tuxedos and women in glittering gowns. Leah, at Rocco's side, wore a gown of emerald silk that clung to her like a second skin. He had gifted her a diamond necklace that felt as heavy as a collar. You look like a queen, amore, he'd whispered, his lips brushing her ear, sending a shiver down her spine. But beneath the surface of the party, the currents of danger were swirling. Leo approached Rocco, his face pale. There's chatter on the wire. The Morettis are moving. It's a trap, Rocco. This whole night is a trap. Rocco's eyes scanned the room, instantly locking on Vincenzo, who was laughing with a senator, a champagne flute in his hand. He looked too relaxed, too triumphant. And Rocco understood. Get her out of here, Rocco commanded Leo, his gaze never leaving his cousin. Take her to the safe room. Now he turned to Leah, his face a mask of cold control. Go with Leo. Do not argue. But before she could move, the ornate ballroom doors burst open. Gunfire erupted. Screams echoed off the marble walls as guests scrambled for cover. It was chaos. Through the pandemonium, Leah saw Vincenzo moving, not towards the fight, but towards her. There was a gun in his hand and a predatory smile on his face. Rocco saw it too. He shoved Leah behind him, drawing his own weapon in a single fluid motion. You were always jealous, Vincenzo. Rocco's voice boomed over the gunfire. You had the same name, the same blood, but none of the strength. Strength. Vincenzo spat, his eyes wild with crazed ambition. You call this weakness strength? He gestured with his gun toward Leah. She made you soft. A king cannot afford a heart. He lunged, aiming for Leah. But Rocco was faster. He moved not like a man in love, but like the Shadow King. He was swift, brutal, and decisive. He intercepted Vincenzo, their bodies crashing into a table laden with food and crystal. The final confrontation was not a prolonged battle. It was an execution. In the midst of the swirling gunfight between his men and the Moretti invaders, Rocco's world narrowed to the traitor. He disarmed his cousin with a sickening crack of bone and slammed him against a pillar. You were wrong, Rocco snarled, his face inches from Vincenzo's terrified one. She did not give me a heart. She reminded me I had one. And she showed me what it was worth fighting for. His justice was swift, a final brutal act that upheld the oldest code of their world. Betrayal was answered with blood. The fighting subsided as quickly as it began. The Moretti assault, without their inside man, faltered and was ruthlessly crushed. In the aftermath, the ballroom was a scene of devastation, a glittering ruin. Rocco stood amidst the wreckage, his suit torn, a cut bleeding over his eye, but he was whole. He found Leah huddled with Leo behind an overturned banquet table, safe. He walked toward her, and the world seemed to hold its breath. He knelt before her, ignoring the broken glass and spilled wine, and took her face in his hands. He wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. There, surrounded by the carnage of his life, he gave her the one thing he had never given anyone: a choice. My world will always have shadows, Leah, he said, his voice raw with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. But you are the light. I can clear your father's debt. You can walk away from all of this, be free. I will never stop you. She looked into his eyes, seeing the fear of rejection that lay beneath the iron control. She saw the man who had torn his own world apart to save hers. She placed her hand over his on her cheek. You told me you learned to live in the shadows, she whispered. Let me show you how to live in the sun. He closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. He had won the war, eliminated the threat, and secured his throne. But in that moment, kneeling before her, he had finally won the only thing that ever truly mattered. He had conquered himself. Can a mafia boss's heart survive true love? Perhaps that is the wrong question. Perhaps the real question is, can his soul survive without it? What do you think? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to share this story if you believe even the darkest hearts deserve a chance at redemption. We'd love to hear your own epic love stories too.